Well, good morning and great to be with you again. I hope you've all slept well and are continuing to enjoy all the feasting that Lee Abbey is lavishing on you in all sorts of different ways. It's a new day, and I wonder how, when you woke up this morning, you felt about the things that I talked about yesterday. If you found that new way of reading Matthew 24 a bit of a challenge, a bit traumatic, a bit of an epistemic trauma, challenging some of the ways you thought before. What I found is that it makes a difference as time goes by, just to let that sink in and process it. I remember still very clearly when somebody first introduced me to thinking that way. I was actually, I did think the person was mad. I was outraged. And actually, it took time for me to reflect on it and sink in and make sense and say, actually, this is what the text is saying. This is the way to make sense of it. But we'll pick up any further questions on that in the question and answer session. As I've been reflecting on it, there is a couple of things that actually are really significant, which come out of it. One is that a certain kind of person looking for the end times, a certain kind of scheme says, and you'll find this quite commonly if you look online for about 2 seconds, that of course part of God's end time schedule is that there'll be a third temple. If you just search for third temple in Jerusalem, you'll find all sorts of stuff about it. And the really interesting thing is the reason why people believe that, even though it's not mentioned anywhere at all in the New Testament, is that when you read Matthew 24, it does look as though there's lots of stuff about the destruction of the temple. Therefore, people say, oh, number one, it's about the destruction of the temple. Number two, it's about the future end times. Therefore, number three, well, if the temple is going to be destroyed in the future, it's going to have to be rebuilt. And I kind of want to get alongside such people and say, do you know, there's a much simpler way of making sense of that text. That is, it is about the destruction of the second temple, the Herod's temple. The second thing that I found really striking, and I keep thinking about this, is the name Gregory used to be pretty popular. It used to be a very popular Christian name. It's not very popular anymore. And you can think of popes called Gregory. You can think of film stars called Gregory, no doubt. You might have friends called Gregory, but there aren't very many of them in the younger generation. I think it's dropped down to something like the most 1,264th popular name. But the reason why is it comes from the Greek word gregoreo, which means to stay awake, to be alert. Now, when we read Matthew 24 in this way, noting that the first half is all about the destruction of the temple, everything was going to happen in the disciples' lifetime, they were to look for the signs and pay attention and look for all the things that Jesus talked about. What's very striking in Matthew 24, I've got the text open in front of me, you might want to have it in front of you, is that once you get to verse 36, Jesus has said, until all these, truly, truly, amen, I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things have happened. And then in verse 36, he then says, but about that day or hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. Nobody knows. So in the first part around the destruction of the temple, the proximate events, the disciples are to look for the signs. But once we focus on the parousia, the second half of the disciples' question from Matthew 24, verse 3, then there are no signs. There is no looking out, working out a schedule. And if you look carefully through the rest of Matthew 24, and then into 25, the parable of the 10 virgins, the parable of the bags of gold, the sheep and the goats, and so on, there's a complete absence of the language of looking for signs. Instead, we do not know when he's going to come. He's going to come like a thief in the night. Even the Son of Man does not know the hour. There's not going to be a sort of schedule of events. We are not to look for signs. We are to gregoreo. We are to be alert, because you do not know when it's going to come. And the only reference to the parousia in the first half is in verse 27, where Jesus says, if there are signs and people saying, I'm him, and so on, do not believe them, because when the Son of Man comes, it is like lightning. Now, lightning doesn't give you a sign. It doesn't say, okay, I'm going to strike here, I'm going to strike here. Oh, now I'm going to strike here, so just be ready for it. Lightning comes unexpectedly. The other really fascinating metaphor is that Jesus talks about coming like a thief in the night, and Paul picks that up as well in 1 Thessalonians. He'll come like a thief in the night. Now, I've not been burgled in the night, but I do not believe that thieves come along and leave a schedule and signs and say, this has happened, this has happened, this has happened. That leads you to know that I'm going to break into your house at 3 o'clock in the morning. They don't. They come unexpectedly. You cannot look for signs and build a schedule. All you can do is be alert. post a watchman, have an alarm system or whatever it is. And this is the consistent language that we find all through the New Testament about the return of Jesus. It's going to be unexpected. We're not to look for signs and write an end time schedule. We are to live as faithful disciples because he's going to come at an hour that we do not expect. I was quite amused to see a conversation where someone challenged an end times forecaster, and they said, but Jesus says you will not know the day or the hour. And the person said, yeah, but he didn't say we wouldn't know the month, which I don't think is a very good reading of that text. But let's turn to that, because I want to knock off very quickly in these next 20 minutes or so 3 things. I'm going to be ambitious here. Number 1, will there be a rapture? Number 2, will there be a tribulation? Number 3, can we calculate the number of the beast and work out what these things are? Now, they're a bit of a sort of I'm gathering together 3 different things, but in fact, they're things that come up all the time in sort of end times talk, and they're actually relatively straightforward things to understand and to realize that many of the popular takes on it are completely mistaken. And again, I'm not trying to do anything magical, but I am going back to the thing I said yesterday, which is, do we take a sort of simple, plain reading of the text and end up with something really complicated? Or do we actually take a slightly more complex, nuanced way of reading the text, and we actually come up with something much more straightforward? And in particular, nuanced ways, first of all, simply looking at what the text says. Secondly, looking at the language that occurs across the New Testament on a particular subject. And thirdly, just entering into the world of the text and of the writer and the first readers of the text. And that's a complex journey. You know, when you go, when you travel to another country, another culture, actually understanding what's going on in that culture can be quite complicated. Learning a new language can be quite complicated. But once you inhabit that culture or that language, actually life is much more straightforward. So, okay, let's ask the question. Do you want to be left behind? Will you be left behind? Should you be left behind? And we answer that simply by turning to Matthew 24, verse 36, and reading what the text says. Now, about that day or hour, so now Jesus is not talking about the immediate proximate events of the temple, but he's looking ahead, answering the second half of the question, that day or hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. Now, here, this is interesting. This is where our English translations do not help us. This phrase here, at the coming of the Son of Man, is the parousia of the Son of Man. This is the end times royal presence, when the King from across the sea, when Jesus enthroned, actually returns as we saw him go, Acts chapter 1, which is a different phrase in Greek from what we saw earlier in verse 30. The Son of Man coming on the clouds is a completely different phrase in Greek, and really English translations ought to translate it differently. So it will be at the royal presence of the Son of Man. For in the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, up to the day Noah entered the ark. And they knew nothing about what would happen, until the flood came and took them all away. That is how it will be at the coming, parousia, the royal presence of the Son of Man. 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken and the other left. 2 women will be grinding with a hand mill, one will be taken and the other left. Now, this is the point at which, if I was with you, we would start getting into a pantomime type interactive thing. So I'm not, and we can't. So let's see how this goes. Okay, so just notice what Jesus says. As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the parousia of the Son of Man. So the question is, how's it going to be at the parousia of the Son of Man? As it was in the days of Noah. Okay. How was it in the days of Noah? Well, there was the wicked and there was the righteous, and the flood came, and who were taken away? Were the righteous taken away, or were the wicked taken away? Well, the answer is, people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, up to the day when the flood came and took them all away. So who's taken away in the days of Noah? Answer, the wicked. How's it going to be in the days of the parousia of the Son of Man? As it was in the days of Noah. In the days of Noah, who was taken away, the righteous or the wicked? Answer, the wicked. So in the days of the parousia of the Son of Man, who is going to get taken away, the righteous or the wicked? Answer, the wicked. When Jesus says 2 men will be a field, one will be taken and the other left, the one who's taken isn't taken away in a rapture to heaven. The one who's taken is taken away in judgment. He's swept away in the judgment. That's what the waters of in the time of Noah signify. They signify waters of judgment. And Jesus is saying exactly the same thing will happen then. So I want to be left behind. Do you? I hope so. Now, if you've always read that and read it with a sort of a rapture vision, the one taken away is the Christian who's whisked off and, and you join in and watch a Nicolas Cage film all about it, then it's very hard to read that text correctly. But actually, all I'm doing is looking carefully at what the text actually says. Jesus says we should be left behind. Now, the second text, which relates to the rapture, we'll turn to this, is 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, where this is Paul's language about, ironically, this is ironic, isn't it? Paul's language, Paul writes this because he does not want us to be confused. He wants us to be really clear on what's going to happen. I should have put a bookmark here in 1 Thessalonians 4, shouldn't I? Here we go. 1 Thessalonians 4. So he wants the believers not to worry about. I do not want you to be uninformed. 1 Thessalonians 4 and verse 13. Brothers and sisters, we do not want you to be uninformed about those who sleep in death. There we go. I mentioned yesterday this metaphor of sleeping in death. And you do not grieve like the rest of mankind who have no hope. We believe that Jesus died and rose again, so we believe that God will bring with Jesus those who have fallen asleep in him. In other words, the resurrection of Jesus is our model of bodily resurrection. And then he talks about the Lord himself will come down from heaven with a loud command, the voice of an archangel, the trumpet call of God. The dead in Christ will rise first. After that, we who are still alive and are left will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so we will be with the Lord forever. Now, here's the image. This is the image again of the parousia. So what Paul is thinking about is when the emperor traveled around the empire, as he might have done only once or twice in his lifetime, it's a big event, a big thing. Then what would happen is that the cities which came under the emperor's rule were governed by elders, seniors in the city, on behalf of the emperor who was away. And when they heard the news that the emperor was coming, the elders would leave the city to go and greet the emperor on his approach. And the emperor would come and meet with the elders. And then, of course, the elders would then turn around and they would accompany the emperor into the city so that, on the one hand, the elders could say, look, here's the emperor we talked about, whose power we exercise when ruling over you. And the emperor could say, look, these are the elders here who've exercised my authority in my absence. That's exactly the kind of picture that Paul is painting. So here we have instead King Jesus coming back from heaven. He's been away a long time. And here we have us coming out of city earth, meeting the Lord in the air. And here's the question: who turns around? Now, Doctrine of the Rapture says Jesus turns around and whisks us all up into heaven. But that's not what Paul would have meant. For Paul, on the model of the parousia of the emperor, it's we who turn around and we re-enter the gates of city earth so that those who did not realize whose authority we exercise would actually be confronted, and we'd see that actually the Jesus we talked about was in fact Lord. Every eye will see him, every knee will bow, and every tongue will confess that Jesus is Lord, because now they realize the king from across the sea, the absent emperor, Jesus who's enthroned on high and really is Lord, now has come back to claim his own and to reign forever. And the key verse there is that Paul says we will be with the Lord forever. And the question is, with the Lord where? The Christian hope is for bodily resurrection on a renewed heaven and earth combined. And if we look at, for instance, Revelation 5, verse 10, the hope is that we will, and Revelation 22:5 as well, we will reign on earth with him forever. The Christian hope is not that we're going to disappear in a disembodied way to be with the Lord in heaven. So we won't be left behind. Well, we will be left behind, and we hope to be left behind. Let me just go to look at our next subject here, which is tribulation. I'm going to do a screen share here. Again, based on verses in Revelation 7, there's a belief that there's going to be the rapture, then there's going to be a tribulation, and then there's a big debate about whether the rapture comes before the tribulation, whether the rapture comes mid-tribulation, whether the rapture comes after the tribulation, or whether there's multiple raptures, multiple tribulations, and so on. And that comes back to the diagram that I showed yesterday. It gets very complicated. Actually, what Scripture says about tribulation is much more straightforward. And the word tribulation is just the authorized version's word for suffering. Again, I'm going to bore you with the Greek. The word is thlipsis. And the only reason I mention that is if you want to study what the New Testament says about tribulation, because, again, English translations don't always translate the one Greek word with the same English word. You do need to either use a very word-for-word translation if you're going to search for this, or use something with Strong's numbering tag, or actually just simply search the Greek text, which with electronic text, it's actually very straightforward to do. So let's simply look at what the New Testament says about tribulation. Here we go. Well, it says quite a lot about it. So in the parable of the sower and the seeds, the 4 different soils, with the seed which is on rocky ground, Jesus says this in Matthew 13, when tribulation or persecution arises on account of the word, immediately this kind of seed withers, this person falls away. So tribulation is something that happens to those who come to faith, and it can make people lose faith. It can make the seed, the word, fruitless. What does Jesus say to his disciples in the so-called farewell discourse in John 14, 15, 16? He says, in the world, here we are, the 2 spheres, the world, the kingdom, this age, the age to come, the world, the sphere ruled by Satan, the kingdom which is ruled by Jesus. In the world, you will have tribulation, but take heart, I've overcome the world. What's really interesting is that tribulation is really important in Acts. Acts chapter 11, a key moment in the narrative of Acts. Those who were scattered because of the tribulation that arose, they then went and gossiped the gospel. This became God's divinely appointed means to actually spreading the good news to the Gentile world. The Gentile mission really took off after the persecution of the Jewish church in Jerusalem. And this is really fascinating. Paul's so-called first missionary journey, he's gone through Lystra and Derbe in the middle of what we now call Turkey. And Luke summarizes Paul's preaching in this way. He says, Paul said many things and encouraged them by saying, through many tribulations, we must enter the kingdom of God. It's a bit like having one of those little wayside pulpits or a sign outside church saying, do you know what suffering is? Come and hear Father John preach this morning, then you'll really find out. That's what Paul's gospel message is. I mean, if you've tried that, it's a good evangelistic strategy. Go around the parish and say, hey, you want to find out about suffering and tribulation? Come and join us. We'll teach you a thing or two. Romans 5, not only that, but we rejoice in our tribulations. And tribulation leads to perseverance. Perseverance leads to character. Character leads to hope. And the hope does not disappoint us because God has filled our hearts with his love by the Holy Spirit. 2 Corinthians, beginning of 2 Corinthians, a remarkable letter about Paul's tribulations. We are, he says, like we hold this treasure in cracked earthen vessels, and we suffer. And he goes on to talk about in later on that all the things he suffered. God comforts us in all our tribulation. And here's the great irony in Revelation when people say, oh, it's all about some future terrible tribulation. I, John, your brother and partner, in the tribulation and the kingdom and the patient endurance that are ours in Jesus. John opens his letter, his prophetic apocalyptic letter, by telling people that if you're in Jesus, yes, you're in the kingdom and you've got all the blessings and good things in the kingdom, but because we live in the overlap of the ages and being in the kingdom, you're still in this world, you will actually have tribulation because of the fact you're in Jesus. Now, I've had some heated arguments, people saying, no, you can't be in Jesus. And it's not, the tribulation doesn't come because you're in Jesus. And I said, well, John says it is. And this is actually a parallel to, I think, what Paul is autobiographical thing in Paul in Philippians chapter 3, where he says, I want to become like him in his sufferings and therefore somehow to attain the resurrection of the dead. Paul is very clear that if we are disciples of Jesus, we will suffer as Jesus suffered. And Jesus has said that all the way through. It's not news. This, if anyone wants to come after me, Mark 8:34, if anyone wants to follow me, they must come after me, take up their cross and come after me. We must follow that way. Now, how do you cope with, on the one hand, kingdom, the wonders of the kingdom, on the other hand, the tribulation we have in the world? The answer is we need patient endurance. This is the main theme of the book of Revelation, is that the wonders of the kingdom on the one hand, the tribulation we suffer in the world on the other, we need patient endurance. This is what we hope for. We stay alert, we stay patient, we remain as faithful witnesses. This is the central message of what it means to have hope that Jesus will return one day. So rapture, sorted. Tribulation, sorted. All that remains is for us to work out the number of the beast. And you're looking forward to this, aren't you? Hooray! Yes, we want to work out the number of the beast. Let's do it. Okay, and the reason why we need to do it is if we turn to Revelation 13:18, we're actually told to do it. Look what the text says. Let the one who has understanding, anyone who comes from the north, that's the Greek word nous. Good northern word, isn't it? We got nous? Let the one who has nous calculate the number of the beast, for it's a human number, and its number is 666. Now, a lot of commentators and people say, oh, no, don't calculate it. It's not a code. Don't work it out. Excuse me, John tells us to. He wants us to. This is a revelation. This isn't an encryption. It's a decryption. We are supposed to work it out. Now, we have to do this, we have to go onto a cross-cultural journey. We have to enter into the world of the text. We have to enter into a world which didn't have a separate number system like we do. Instead, it actually had every letter of the alphabet stood for a number. Now, I'm just doing this using the Roman alphabet that we use rather than using the Greek alphabet or the Hebrew alphabet, because it just makes it a bit simpler. But this is the most common, one of the most common schemes of allocating numbers to letters in the ancient world. And there's lots of evidence for this. You can find it all over the place. It's very easy to verify this. So A is 1, B is 2, C is 3, D is 4, and so on, down to J is 10. Now, if you carry on going 11, 12, 13, that's fine, but you just won't get bigger. You'll get enough to buy an apple, but not enough to do your weekly shopping. So then you go K is 20, L is 30, M is 40, and so on. S is 100. And then if you go 110, 120, that's fine to do your weekly shopping, but it's not enough to buy a donkey. So then you need to do, you go in hundreds. T is 200, U is 300, and so on. Now, if every letter has a number, then every word has a value. So just very simply, my name is Ian, I-A-N. So I is 9, A is 1, that makes 10, N is 50. So the number of my name is 60. Now, what you need to do, I'll leave this up, pause the video, and what you all need to do is work out the number of your name and then shout it out. Okay, have you done that? That's quite fun. Now, it's quite fun. It's kind of spooky. I hope there's nobody here called David Morgan, because if you work out David Morgan, that does add up to 666. And it means that the pastoral workers will need to do a bit of prayer ministry there. But and I did actually have a David Morgan in my class once when we did this. And we're still friends though, so that's good. But we know that this is a very common way of using numbers. And just a few examples. One is in Pompeii, there's an etching on the wall saying, I love her whose number is 545, which is great for the lover and the lovee, but it's also good that the father of the lovee doesn't know, because you can work out, if you know your name, you can work out your number. But if you know the number, it's not easy to work out the name. It's actually what's called a trapdoor code. We might talk about it in the Q&A. It's actually a very similar way to the way that your computer actually manages to buy things online by this kind of one-way encryption. But I'll explain that when we're talking online on Zoom. Many in the Sibylline Oracles, a 3rd century Christianized document, it was said that the Messiah would have the number 888. And in fact, if you do this exercise with the name Jesus in Greek, you do get 888. Why is that significant? Because Jesus was raised on the 8th day. Sunday's the first day, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Sunday's the 8th day. If there are 7 days of this age, Jesus was raised on the first day of the new age. We're stepping into the kingdom, the age to come. And that's why we worship on a Sunday now, not on a Saturday at the end of the old creation, but on a Sunday, the beginning of the new creation. In Suetonius' History of the 12 Caesars, there's a little ditty going around, a new calculation, Nero killed his own mother. And that works on the pun of numerology, that the word new calculation adds up to 1004. Nero killed his own mother adds up to 1004 as well. And it shows that this was true. Or in rabbinical thinking, the Messiah, the branch of David, that's from the branch mentioned in Isaiah 11. The branch of David would be called Menachem, meaning comforter, because again, the value, the number of the name word branch 374 is the same as the number of the name Menachem. So we can see how it works. And it was in the ancient world, it was something people did all the time. So let's work out the number of the beast. So I've just written here the word beast, therion in Greek. I've written it then in English letters. I've written it then, transcribed it into Hebrew. You just have to trust me for this one. Transcribed it into Hebrew, and then I've done exactly what you've just done with your names and written down the number of the name. What do we get? 400 plus 200 is 600 plus 10, 610, 616, 666. How about that? The number of the beast is therion is 666. So it is. And of course, all John's first readers are saying, big deal, John. We knew that. We know about numerology. Thank you very much. But it's also the number of a man's name. So which man's name should we try? Now, again, if I was with you, I'd get a volunteer to just somebody suggest a name. And inevitably, someone would say, hey, let's try Nero. Okay, let's try Nero. Thank you very much. You at the back there for mentioning that. Let's try Nero. Neron Caesar, Neron Caesar. We know that from inscription evidence that Nero's name was often spelled with an N on the end. Again, we write that in Greek letters, Neron, Caesar. Transliterate that into Hebrew. We do lose some letters because Hebrew doesn't have any vowels. It only has consonants. So there are letters that we lose when we transliterate that into Hebrew. And that actually says Neron Caesar. If you don't read Hebrew, you have to trust me for that. Let's again add up the numbers. 50, 250, 256, 306, 406, 466, 666. The number of the beast is the number of a man's name, and it's 666. Now, that might look like a fiddly bit of technical grammar, and you might want to say, oh, numerology, so what? Well, here's the so what. And this actually gives us a key to all these issues around reading texts about the end of the world. The reason why we get into a problem, it comes back to how we read the text, is that so many people look at the end of the world texts and they draw a straight line from what they find in the New Testament to what we see today. So the number of the beast, 666, that stands for Adolf Hitler, or it stands for the Roman Church. That was true for Luther, for example, or it's the European Union, or it's to do with barcodes. You don't know the barcodes look like they might have a 6 and a 6 and a 6 in them, or whatever it is. The problem with that is it's a simplistic way of dealing with the text. In particular, it assumes that the New Testament writers are writing to us, as if both their first audience and everything that's happened in the last 2,000 years is of no interest or consequence whatever. But although scripture was written for us, it wasn't written to us. So with all of the New Testament, with all the biblical texts, we have to go on a interpretive journey. We have to say not, what is it saying to us immediately? What we have to say, first of all, is what was it saying to its first readers? And what John is saying, what John is doing using 666, using his numerology, is he's pointing his readers very clearly to say, look, the beast that's come from the sea is actually Roman imperial power. This is where in Turkey the Roman ships would arrive from. They'd come across the sea. And you have to make a decision. You can't be a good Roman citizen and a good follower of Jesus because this is exercising beastly power. Chapter 13 in Revelation tells us all about what beastliness is. And our question is to say, not what is the text saying to us, but how is it helping us to make sense of our world? If for John and his readers, he saw beastliness in Roman imperial power, where do we see the same in our world today? Where do we see ideologies or power dynamics, empires that trample the saints, that obsessed with image, that want to control life, that control finances and economics and so on. So we have to go on that hermeneutical journey. And that actually gives us the key to reading all these texts, to read them in context, to understand what they're saying to the first readers. And only then do we hear what God is saying to us about all this end time stuff. Well, we've covered quite a bit again today. So I'll leave you with these questions for discussion, looking at those three things of the rapture, the tribulation, and the number of the beast. So questions you might want to have a think about in conversation now. Firstly, what difference does it make to be looking forward when Jesus returns, to be reigning on earth with him forever? Secondly, how do you respond to the way that the New Testament talks about tribulation? Is this good news? Thirdly, as I said, these texts are not written to us, that they are written for us. How does that help us make better sense of all these end times texts? For those of you who are not at the Abbey but are watching this later, I hope you found that useful. As I mentioned before, there's buttons at the bottom down here you can subscribe to on my channel, so you can see other videos that I produce as well. We produce a weekly discussion about the Sunday gospel readings. And also, if you found this is useful and to pass it on, there's a little share button here. Click on that and it gives you a link which you can pass on. Thanks very much for joining me.